day in Manhattan, clear as could be, till the planes hit the buildings and changed history. They stood for an hour once the damage was done, but then suddenly crumbled. 10 seconds they were gone. There were cascading projections of steel into dust. Looked like explosions, but it was not discussed. So I turned off the TV and shut out the lights. It's all just illusion, right in front of my eyes. Well, I'm not scared of dying. We're all bound for heaven, just sharing the truth about 9/11. Now building number 7 dropped the cleanest of all. Yet the world still knows nothing of this amazing free fall. There was no real reason. It wasn't hit by a plane. They say it was a fire, yet you can't see the flames. You see cascading projections of steel into dust. Looks like demolition, but it's never discussed. So I turn off the TV and shut out the lights. It's all just illusion, right in front of my eyes. Well, I'm not scared of dying. We're all bound for heaven, just sharing the truth about 9/11. They say that the bigger the lie, the more people believe, and the deeper the fear, the more easily we are deceived. Turn off the TV and I shut out the lights. It's all just illusion, right in front of my eyes. Well, I'm not scared of dying. We're all bound for heaven, just sharing the truth about 9/11. Yes, I'm sharing the truth about 9/11.
Hi, I'm Bill Olson, the host of 9/11 Was an Inside Job and Other State Crimes Against Democracy, the longest title of any cable access show as far as I know. Not that that matters, but we're going to get right into it today. The latest thing that they've done, of course, was to dedicate the 9/11 memorial. What a travesty. It cements into perpetuity the propaganda of 9/11. I mean, it's absolutely disgusting. Now, I'm going to let Leanne McAdoo of Infowars.com explain to you about the travesty that they've committed. So let's go play that and be right back.
September 11th Memorial Museum in New York was dedicated today. Of course, it was a very somber, emotional scene. President Obama and others took the opportunity to remind everyone that we will never forget. But in actuality, what this museum wants us never to forget is their version of what happened that day. Now, rooms inside the museum are lined with pictures of the some 3,000 victims of the World Trade Center attacks, along with with some of the debris that they were able to collect from the rubble, including gloves and wallets. There's a melted fire truck. One of the rooms specifically is dedicated solely to pictures of the hijackers, and it spins the tale of how these extremists came to pull off this devastating attack. But what is missing from the museum, of course, are the fuzzy details surrounding 9/11. These are, of course, the details that nobody dares discuss, lest you be called a conspiracy theorist. There was no room dedicated to the puzzling scenario surrounding 9/11, like the magic passport that was found blocks away from the debris that somehow the terrorist was able to fling out the window of the airplane before it flew into the World Trade Center and exploded from so high above the streets of New York, and they magically found the passport that helped them identify the hijackers. There was no section in the museum that shows the non-existent plane hitting the Pentagon. There were no pictures of the Pennsylvania crash site, where for the only time in recorded history, a plane flew into and under the ground, leaving very little debris. No bodies were ever recovered from the site. But miraculously, they were able to find the black boxes. Miraculous. And then, of course, any forensic investigator would want to get their hands on the steel and find out what happened to the steel that would have caused this completely random and strange event that's never happened before or since, of buildings collapsing from flames. You'd want to investigate what happened to that steel, but no, it was promptly shipped off and melted down, used for scrap metal. And then, of course, they have somehow miraculously been able to identify most of the hijackers with their DNA. That's right, forensic investigators sifted through the pulverized dust of the World Trade Center rubble, and they were able to find most of the hijackers and identify most of the hijackers, although they have yet to identify the majority of the thousands of victims of the 9/11 crash. I mean, really? So most of the families there that are going to the memorial to, that's the gravesite for their family members, they're not going to have any closure. They haven't been able to identify their bodies, but miraculously, maybe it was the magic passport just led them to those specific areas in the rubble. And, while they're at it, maybe those investigators can find the $2.3 trillion that were missing from the Pentagon. Remember, Donald Rumsfeld announced that just one day before 9/11?
The day before 9/11, Secretary of Defense Donald Rumsfeld declared war, not on foreign terrorists.
The adversary is closer to home. It's the Pentagon bureaucracy.
He said money wasted by the military poses a serious threat.
In fact, it could be said that it's a matter of life and death.
I'm sure that $2.3 trillion was just stored in a suitcase somewhere, probably in the part of the Pentagon that was disintegrated along with the invisible plane. But see, that was more than a decade ago, and the government is still just wasting our taxpayer dollars without a care. Yeah, I'm talking about Obamacare. Now, the Obama administration has still failed to instruct states on how to fund $37 billion of the Obamacare tax. Now, this is going to hit the state Medicaid programs, and basically, if they can't get this funded, they're going to be in violation of federal law, and this could basically push the Medicaid programs out of existence entirely. Of that $37 billion, 13.6 are going to come from state taxpayers, and $24 billion will come from the federal government, also known as the taxpayers by way of the federal government. So basically, it's just another fiasco to add to Obamacare. This, along with the pushing back of the employer mandate, just so it shows that nobody really knows how it's going to be funded, and that really wasn't of any concern to them. Their concern was getting control.
Howdy. I thought I'd bring it back right now because it... Hello? Okay. Yeah, I kind of threw a monkey wrench in the works there. I wasn't going to let her talk about the Obamacare stuff, and although that's a subject in itself. But just anecdotally, a quick aside. The other day I was helping another producer do a show, and he had two candidates for, one of them was a candidate for U.S. Senate. I'm not sure. Maybe they both were. But the point is that right after the interview, I mean, they had just got done talking about Obamacare and other things like that, and they were calling it a socialized medicine and all sorts of other things like that. And I got to do what you rarely ever get to do. Now, he might not have been a senator now, but someday he might be. And with any luck, he'll remember what I said. And what I said to him was, could I get you to help me with a definition? And they all look quizzing, I said, what is it when you merge corporate interests with government? And he kind of hesitated, and I said, well, fascism, right? And they said, yeah. And I said, so that's fascism. Well, then quit calling it socialized medicine, for goodness sakes. I said, because that's a lie. There's nothing socialized about that medicine at all. It was written for and by the insurance companies to enrich themselves and to give themselves less responsibility. To call privatizing healthcare, putting a giant profit motive on your health, they call that socialized medicine. That's just a lie. And I got to say that to the guy, and we'll see if it makes any difference. I also said about marijuana, I don't care whether you're for or against marijuana, but take it out of Schedule 1 because that's a lie. And he says, what do you mean Schedule 1? And I said, well, they got it classified with cocaine and heroin, and that's just a lie. And you don't have any credibility if you continue to support that lie. Whatever your point of view is, if you support something that's a lie, kind of like 9/11 being done by Muslims. Well, anyway, we got time ticking away. Glenn Greenwald, as you know, was starting up a whole new website and was funded by a billionaire and all that jazz. He was kind of slow, at least criticized in being slow in producing some of Edward Snowden's documents. And so the clip we're about to play shows Greenwald came out with a brand new book and several revelations thereby. So let's go ahead and play it. We'll be right back, about 4 minutes.
NSA documents revealed today by journalist Glenn Greenwald is this very telling slide. It's from 2011, explicitly confirming that the NSA and its partners are in the game of collecting it all. And it speaks to what Snowden and the journalists he's worked with have been warning of all along. An out-of-control spy agency with unbelievable tools that pose a threat to privacy around the world. At one point, the NSA was collecting more than 71 million communications a month in Poland. Another document seems to show how the NSA has partnered with a number of American corporations to carry out its collect it all mission, including one mysterious corporate partner since 1985 that has, quote, access to international cables, routers, and switches, and is aggressively involved in shaping internet traffic to run through NSA monitors. As a result, the NSA's Fairview program was able to collect more than 6 billion phone call records a month. And this slide gives more information on the NSA's supply chain interdiction, where the agency intercepts foreign-bound computer servers and routers, implants bugs in them, and then sends them back into transit, allowing the NSA to crack some of its hardest targets. All this data collection is posing a challenge to the NSA, one that they are aware of in this document, stating that collection is outpacing our ability to ingest, process, and store to the norms to which we have become accustomed. But the NSA isn't holding all this data for itself. In fact, it's sharing it with a number of other governments around the world, creating what appears to be an information network of dozens of countries all cooperating with each other and all spying on each other's citizens. This document reveals the breadth of the NSA's spying partners beyond the Five Eyes. And despite being partners, France and Israel are both running spy operations against the U.S. as well. In fact, a national intelligence estimate found that Israel is the third most aggressive intelligence service against the U.S. Also, the NSA's claims that it doesn't engage in economic espionage are further belied by new slides showing the NSA's Blarney program specifically goes after economic and diplomatic intelligence. And this slide, showing examples of PRISM reporting topics, reveals the NSA is interested in Mexican energy issues, Japanese trade, and Venezuelan oil. We know that the NSA targeted Brazilian President Dilma Rousseff. This slide shows the spies bragging about it. Meanwhile, new documents shed more light on the NSA's British spying counterpart, GCHQ, and their disruption activities against hacktivist groups like Anonymous. Here, British spies are told the benefits of circumventing traditional law enforcement and using their tools to discover targets and then disrupting their communications through either denial of service attacks or, as this slide shows, bombarding their phones with text messages and calls and deleting their online presence. Now, these are just some of the new documents revealed by journalist Glenn Greenwald today. The remaining can be found online as well as in his new book. And there's more documents to come still. In an interview Greenwald did with GQ this week, he said, "I like to think of it as a fireworks show. You want to save your best for last. There's a story that from the beginning I thought would be our biggest, and I'm saving that. This will be the finale, a big missing piece. Snowden knows about it and is excited about it." So, the NSA disclosures will continue. There's big stories yet to come. Stay tuned. In Washington, D.C., Sam Sachs, RT. Among the new NSA...
Okay, it makes me think about a quote I heard once from one of the Laugh-In ladies. You'll see if you remember me quoting it. It was when she was accused of being, cynical. She said, "Yeah, but no matter how cynical you are, it's hard to keep up," or something like that. In other words, things are changing so darn fast. So many events happening that you can't really focus on one of them before the next one pops up. And, I don't think a lot of that is just coincidence. But right now we've got a special presentation that I think this is really an interesting one. It's a 21-year-old clip of Ace Hayes from his secret government seminar. And he's, interestingly enough, he's kind of covering stuff that we just talked about with Snowden, the spying and whatnot. Well, he's going to be talking about spying that happened back then, and then he's going to make some predictions, and you can judge for yourself with your own knowledge of today's current events. How accurate was he on his predictions? So we're going to play this. This is a half hour, and when we come back, we'll probably open up the phone lines. We'll see what happens.
Woolsey, that was an assistant to Secretary of State Kissinger. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, they do change coats, don't they?
Well, it's a little bit like watching the parade of the leopards. I have yet to see one without spots. I mean, they all seem to have spots, and it's just this long parade of leopards going through, and I feel an awful lot like a mouse. Every time there's an election, I'm saying, why do I want to vote for any color of cat? I don't give a damn what cat gets elected. What do? They eat mice. I'm a mouse. Why should I vote for a cat? All you got to do is remember that the greatest anti-communist who ever lived was Adolf Hitler. Well, he's the only one that went all the way to the gates of Moscow. I mean, I'm absolutely convinced that people like Jesse Helms probably have a picture of Hitler in their personal shrine, with a Waffen SS flag. Well, I mean, Galen, the name Galen comes from General Reinhard Galen, who was the Gestapo chief east for Adolf Hitler, who helped Allen Dulles and his brother John Foster set up the CIA in the United States. And all of those people, Wild Bill Donovan, all of them were working with the Nazis through all of the Hitlerian period. They were all involved in the creation of the Nazi state. And, I mean, that is documented up the kazoo. You know, just get a hold of Trading with the Enemy. You'll find out how General Motors and Standard Oil and GE and ITT and every other corporado in the United States was directly and intimately involved with the whole Nazi fascist movement. And in fact, they were making money off of both sides through all of World War II.
Don't forget the Bushes and the Harrimans.
Well, they are corporados. I mean, literally, everybody was in on it, except the hockey pucks who got the opportunity to get their guts blown out in various battles. I mean, one of the great thing about war is that ultimately it's like the Super Bowl. The mafia owns both sides. You know, I mean, it's getting to the point in history where people are going to have to wake up and understand that and stop cooperating.
Except now they can do it with very few people.
Except for one thing, they got to tax the bejesus out of a whole lot of people to pay for those few people to go blast away with billion-dollar high-tech toys. I mean, they do not tax themselves.
You mean like Mark and Margaret Thatcher?
Well, if in fact investigations ever get completed, we will find out that Maggie Thatcher's son was up to his eyeballs not only in Iran-Contra and making gobs of money off of the arms sales to both sides, just like George Bush was, but also that in fact the reason why BCCI money disappeared in the Isle of Jersey is because the whole operation was a collusion between the espionage apparat and organized crime of Great Britain and the United States and all of their satellite criminal syndicates. I mean, if you want to understand the government, study organized crime, because in fact they're the same thing. And my you know, hissing contest with people who say there is no such thing as conspiracy, all there are is institutions, it seems to me that if in fact what the elite call planning were not a conspiracy, they would not go to such lengths to conceal what their plans are. I mean, if somebody is organizing things to improve my life, why would they want to keep it secret from me? Let's remember one thing here. The idea that the Trilateral Commission was based on was that Japan, North America, and Europe, the plutocrats, are going to own and control the world, and they're going to have the hockey pucks fight it out with each other with sticks.
Isn't the Trilateral basically Caucasian, though?
Oh, no. Oh, no. You look at the list. You have Japan, North America, and Europe. It is truly trilateral.
A lot of what she's saying was true a couple years ago on semiconductors, but now it's coming back into parity. One thing interesting is last year, 80% of all high-tech patents were obtained by the Japanese. So in effect, what she says is partially true in the sense that he who controls the patents controls who's in business.
And not only that,
those chips are made everywhere.
No, but I'm talking patents though. Oh, I have too, but I'm talking patents now.
I guess. Well, I'll tell you.
You know, if they control the patents.
You know, I scored for like 6 years. All I ever saw was El Salvador. Okay, then all of a sudden El Salvador's got a lot more turnover on it. Now you see lots of Malaysian chips. You see it from, you know, pick a Far East country. I rarely see anything say made in Japan. You know, and of course a lot.
There's a lot in Taiwan, Singapore.
Into the computers, but I wasn't using the you know, extremely high speed, multi-bit digital chips that the Japanese really specialize in. And Intel, you know, over here in Beaverton is doubling their operations here, and they're going to be making chips. You got Cray.
Yeah, they
There's
better.
Josephson Junction in the Cray technology, and I don't believe those are made in Japan. I think they're
No, the Cray's made here. Yeah.
Right, and Cray actually owns FPS now out here in Beaverton. You've got Hughes Aircraft Company in Santa Barbara and Malibu, and they're the only company I know that's making three-dimensional integrated circuit chips. I mean, they're not going to cut us out. I mean, that's
Well, but again, you see, it seems to me that what we're being done is we're being set up to hiss at each other down here where the peons are, and because of nationalism. Hey, I got news for you. A banker is a banker is a banker. I mean, I have so much fun with the nutcake, knuckle-dragging right-wingers who say, Jewish bankers run the world. And I look at them, I said, wait a minute, you're trying to tell me that a Baptist is a Jew? The Rockefellers are Baptists, bozo. Now, you're going to tell me the Rockefellers are Jews because they're Baptists? Well, no, okay, a Baptist is not a Jew. Well, then we have Baptist Jewish bankers. And I say, hey, do you ever hear of BCCI? Yeah. Is the Emir of Abu Dhabi a Jew? No, he's a Muslim. I say, okay, so we have an international Jewish, Baptist, Islamic bankers conspiracy. And pretty soon I finally get these morons to pick their knuckles up off the floor, and something goes click in their little pea brain, and they say, oh, bankers!
But maybe there's a reason the Arab bankers are getting bad press.
You know, as far as I'm concerned, I will never starve to death as long as there is roast rump of banker. I mean, I'm dead serious. When there's nothing left to eat in this country but roast rump of banker, it will be on the table.
Cooked, I hope.
That preferably medium well.
So you don't think our national security is being threatened by...
There is no national security. It's a total myth.
Okay.
We're all a bunch of hockey pucks. We're being hit with sticks. Why did the German and the French working class go to war with each other twice in this century? Because there was a worker on each end of the bayonet. And the capitalist owned the bayonet. Because the hockey pucks are stupid. How do you spell veteran? S-U-C-K-E-R. And I am a sucker. Because I'm a veteran. But again, you see, the way that the transnational plutocracy stays in power is by pandering to the crudest instincts of the common hockey puck. I mean, for instance, how racism, ethnocentrism. I mean, you got to remember, in the Vietnam War, the Viet Cong would float a little, you know, they'd just take a plank, you know, and they'd put a little mast on it, and they'd put a sign on it in English. And I remember one of the classics, black GI, we yellow Vietnamese never caused you any oppression. Why do you fight a war against yellow men for white men?
Ooh, man, that's great. And what did the black guys have to say about that?
A lot of them shot their officers.
Oh, good response. Yeah.
Hey, listen, you know, I mean, can you imagine the thoughts in the mind of a knuckle-dragging Louisiana racist redneck honky drill instructor in the Marine Corps in 1970 with 80 black faces, and he's teaching them how to kill? We left Vietnam for a whole multiplicity of reasons. Number one, there was $3 billion in damage done in the United States by bombings in 18 months in 1968 and the first part of 1969. And that is not a hypothetical figure I dreamed up. That comes from the U.S. Treasury report. The Bank of America in, I think it was Isla Vista, wasn't it, was burnt down by the students?
I provide the man.
No. It wasn't. No, it wasn't the weathermen. It was just, in fact, some PO'd local students who had had enough and said to Bank of America. In fact, it changed the whole outlook of Bank of America. Their outlook, shall we say, was modified by the experience of having their bank burned down. And in fact, you know, I mean, a whole series of things happened inside the United States and in the world. And that era, in fact, was the one where revolution was, in fact, possible. It scared the absolute bleep out of the ruling elite. And they said, this is never going to happen again. The first thing they did, they destroyed education. The second thing, they destroyed the unions. The third thing they destroyed was income, housing, health care. And they are going to drive people so far down into the swamp where they're living so hand to mouth, just like tonight. Well, a lot of people are already there, but you got to understand, it's a matter, you know, when you push a ladder down into the cesspool, some rungs get there before others. But eventually, we'll all get there.
And another thing they also did is they heavily infiltrated all of the resistance movement so they could set the tone and the tenor of all the resistance movements and control the so-called resistance movement. So you could have things like 10,000 people gather in Pioneer Square and cheer on the integrity of our esteemed leader of community policing, Tom Potter.
Your point is well taken. That was part of the methodology. And it certainly, I mean, it was not limited to that, but that was included in a broad and comprehensive program.
What do they call it, peace Nazis?
Something
like that?
I remember we went through a period where there were people with armbands who would make sure that you didn't get out of the line of march.
You yell at the cops.
Exactly.
They come and slap you if you yell, if you call the cops pigs.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
They still are in charge now.
During the war protests, there's people walking around telling you not to call the cops pigs.
Well, I would
be nice to the police, be polite, wear a suit, put on a tie, and look like a member of the Chamber of Commerce, and then they'll respect you and listen to you.
So that's PC protesting.
Yeah.
I would urge everyone to look very seriously at who is running all of the movements that they see. If you see a lot of the same faces turn up and a lot of the same actions perpetrated by a lot of the same people, it makes the hackles on my neck kind of rise a little bit. It causes a bit of suspicion in me. And without naming names at this point, I would just urge people to do that.
Well, I really second that, because I am absolutely convinced that Portland is a test pad for government psyops, disinformation, and counterintelligence operations. And they want to see, how do you take little Beirut and turn it into an ant hill that will essentially consume itself and never be a threat to them.
Do you foresee a revival of 1960s style activism?
Well, I think that there are enough survivors of that era who, in fact, graduated from the School of Hard Knocks, that I don't think it's going to be a replay exactly, but I think it is going to be something that is informed by the experience and hopefully wisdom that has been developed, and it'll be animated by the same ideals. But it will not be a replay in just a repetition.
I think, from what I'm hearing from a lot of people, where you might see a lot of change potentially happening is where you're seeing the crossbreeding between the so-called rednecks, who haven't been so beaten down by the lifestyle of the cities, and the hippies who've moved out there, what's left of them. You're getting a crossbreeding of the people who've lived up sort of close to the land with the people who've got kind of the ideals about it. And, one of the real strong areas where you kind of saw that begin, where people have been kind of seeing that happening, was Idaho, which brings us back to Randy Weaver again.
Well,
what happened there with the BATF, and basically then that was a test pattern in my reading of it.
And the sheriff they tried to indict up there or something. Oh, really? I think he even went, when he was his indictment in jail or something.
Well,
Like a third of the vote.
I would remind you, you want to plug in at this point, because I want to say something about Weaver and Idaho and whatnot. Go ahead.
I just wanted to make a comment. 2 years ago, I was a sophomore in high school and marched in various different demonstrations against the war, and I noticed in a recent copy of WW that my picture was on the front page. You could scarcely, it was a picture of the war march, anti-war march, and the day of that protest, 2 years ago, 2 days from now, I was on, because I was towards the front of the march, I was on 3 of the 3 major networks at 5 o'clock news. A friend of mine came up to me and said, "Hey, Chris, did you see you were on the news?" And I said, "Well, what are you talking about?" He says, "Well, you were on all the networks, man. You were at the front of the parade." And I'm just like, well, oh shit. Because, I mean, I haven't had a lot of experience in frisking with the law, but I mean, I'm kind of scared, you know? It's like, I'm kind of scared. Just in the state of things as things are.
Don't worry about it. There are other people who outrank you. You're not at the top of the list.
If they want to kill you, they'll send you to war.
They do that with great regularity. But I wanted to point out, remember I've said that the John Birch Society was created by the CIA for the same person, for the same reason that they created a lot of other outfits. And the interesting thing is that the John Birch Society newspaper, this is really classic. Randy Weaver's role in the plot to discredit Idaho's conservatism. This is an article in the John Birch Society newspaper, December 14, 1992, and it's they're charging in a lengthy, convoluted story that Idaho patriot Randy Weaver was an ignorant dupe of a high-level government conspiracy to wreck the growth of the John Birch Society in Idaho. According to the magazine's bizarre theory, establishment-backed agents provocateurs posing as neo-Nazis flocked to Idaho to set Weaver up for the federal government-sponsored military-style assault that led to the death of Weaver's wife, Vicki, and his 14-year-old son, along with the near-fatal wounding of family friend Kevin Harris. The Birchers also hint broadly that Lieutenant Colonel Bo Greitz might have been involved in the establishment's conspiracy.
Yes, talking about Idaho.
What magazine is this?
This is the John Birch Society newspaper.
Oh.
Well, but hey, listen, I mean, it's the Spotlight who's trashing the John Birch Society. Now, we have been taught that they're the same.
Yeah.
Well, obviously, then, the Spotlight must be proving that the John Birch Society is ultimately left-wing, and you must be right-wing for quoting them.
Something like that, Paul.
Pardon?
A lot of these groups are just people. They all feel they're all being pressured down by the government. I mean, the thing is the government is united.
Well, if in fact the real people in this country who basically just want the Bill of Rights, they just want the principles of the Declaration of Independence, i.e. everybody is created equal, and ain't nobody ever going to be a trillionaire when they're born. I mean, I want to absolutely go back to Jefferson. I want to eliminate primogeniture, and I want to eliminate entail. I want to abolish the inheritability of wealth beyond a modest middle class level. Everything above that, you cannot inherit, period.
It's like when he was mentioning, about the hippies and the rednecks getting together, though. I mean, because of the common...
If we can do that, we can do something.
See, I think that to me, the basis of fascism in Portland, the reason it's working is the intolerant fascism.
Oh, you mean the left politically correct
versus the right and all that. You know, it's the thing is that's why it's working so well here, is because of the general intolerance of everybody. Everybody, the right hates the left, and the left hates the right.
Fascism is great as long as you got gay rights.
You mean if we have a gay fascist, it's cool?
Yeah, you can promote, you got
Of us declined to prosecute.
Okay, that was the end of that section of the Ace Hayes show. Usually it was an hour show back then. We just saw probably about 22 minutes. Now, I mean, boy, did he cover a lot of things there. But while he was talking, he reminded me about Brown versus the Board of Education. Today is the 60th anniversary of that landmark Supreme Court decision that basically eliminated, or it struck down, Plessy versus Ferguson. And Plessy versus Ferguson was where that infamous separate but equal phrase came for the, when referring to the schools. Well, my dad was a political science teacher a long time ago. He's dead now, but on the 25th anniversary of the Brown versus Board of Education decision, he had a poster, and it said, 25 years after Brown v. Board of Education, schools are still separate and unequal. Well, 10 years ago, there was the 50th anniversary, and I made a little yellow post-it and put it up there, and it said, 50 years later, schools are still separate and unequal. Well, here we are, the 60th anniversary, ladies and gentlemen, and yep, same old story, separate and unequal. So, where are our priorities? Obviously, the power structure has no incentive whatsoever to do anything to, help the lower classes. And if you think it's anything but a class struggle, you're wrong. It's always been a class struggle, and they always try to divert you with racism issues and whatnot. Well, now, since we have enough time, several shows ago, we were talking about the rash of shootings at schools and whatnot, and wherever they were, the mass shootings that the government was using to leverage gun control issues, even though statistically it's ridiculous. But the point is, though, that every single one of the mass shooters in recent history, as far as we know anyway, was on SSRIs. That's selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors, okay? And what it has to do with, let's just put it this way. If you ever read the label that comes, the brochure that comes with any of the antidepressant drugs and whatnot, you'll see can cause depression, cause suicidal tendencies, suicidal thoughts, on and on like that, and that's what's happening. So here's a brief history of the SSRI shootings from Infowars.com. James Corbett, not Infowars, sorry.
And 2 classmates, as well as injuring 25 others, after engaging in a shooting spree that ended up in his school's cafeteria. In the investigation, it emerged that he had been taking popular antidepressant medication Prozac since the summer of the previous year. In December 2000, Michael McDermott went on a shooting rampage at his workplace, Edgewater Technologies, killing 7 of his co-workers. During his trial, the court heard testimony that in the weeks before the shooting, McDermott had tripled the dosage of his antidepressant medication, Prozac, from 70 milligrams per day to 210 milligrams. In March 2005, 16-year-old Jeff Weiss shot and killed 9 people, including 5 students at Red Lake Senior High School in Minnesota, before turning the gun on himself. It was later revealed he had been undergoing treatment for depression and had been on Prozac at the time. In September 2008, Finnish post-secondary student Matti Saari shot and killed 10 other students on campus before killing himself. The official Finnish government report on the incident revealed that he had been taking an SSRI medication at the time of the shooting. SSRI stands for Selective Serotonin Reuptake Inhibitor, and it is a class of drugs that is often used to treat depression and anxiety. It includes Prozac, Zoloft, Celexa, Paxil, and a host of other commonly prescribed antidepressants. And the perpetrators of a raft of school shootings, mass murders, and other violent incidents in recent years have been taking them. And so it was perhaps not surprising when the culprit of this month's mass shooting at Fort Hood, Specialist Ivan Lopez, turned out to be taking unnamed antidepressants himself.
We have very strong evidence that he had a medical history that indicates unstable psychiatric or psychological condition.
Lopez had been prescribed powerful antidepressants and the sleep drug Ambien. He was getting help. Dr. Javier Amador interviewed Major Nidal Hassan, who killed 13 people here at Fort Hood in 2009. Mental health issues, he says, must be aggressively treated, particularly when antidepressants are given.
You have to be very cautious and take care to be aware of which symptoms are improving more quickly than others. People's motivation comes back, their ability to sleep comes back, they feel more energy, but they're still feeling hopeless and suicidal.
Although it is yet to be reported, and may in fact never be revealed, precisely what type of antidepressant Lopez was taking, or whether it was an SSRI, the number of confirmed SSRI shooters in recent years has raised the question of a causal link between the medication and incidents of violence. Although the drug manufacturers are quick to downplay this connection as anecdotal or coincidental,
too often people like to assume, they project, they make a little bit of logic, and they say, whoa, that could theoretically explain a large problem. That's faulty logic.
Boca Raton psychiatrist Abby Strauss says linking SSRI discontinuation to violence is oversimplistic, and he calls spreading the theory, quote, scary.
Mounting scientific evidence points to a strong correlation between the use of psychiatric drugs in general, and SSRIs in particular, and violent behavior. In 2010, the Public Library of Science published a study titled Prescription Drugs Associated with Reports of Violence Towards Others, which examined how 484 drugs were associated with 1,937 documented cases of violent behavior. Of those 484 drugs, 31 of them were responsible for 79% of the violence, including 11 antidepressants. When incidents of school massacres in the US are charted against prescription of psychiatric medication, the correlation is undeniable. Further research is needed to establish if there is a causal linkage between these pharmaceuticals and the incidence of violence, but critics of the big pharmaceutical manufacturers complain such research is hampered by the low standards for reporting that these companies are held to. One such critic, David Healy, author of over 150 peer-reviewed papers in the field of psychiatry and the author of numerous books, including Pharmageddon, joined me on the Corbett Report last week to discuss this issue. And you have, for example, on davidhealy.org, your own website, you have an article on the 25th anniversary of the introduction of Prozac, how Prozac has changed psychiatry since it was first approved. And in that, you list the startling fact that there are probably something between 1,000 to 1,500 extra suicides in the U.S. each year triggered by an antidepressant, an extra 2,000 to 2,500 in Europe, and there are probably between 1,000 and 1,500 extra episodes of violence in the U.S. each year, and an extra 2,000 to 2,500 extra episodes in Europe, which is a startling figure to be pinned down towards one class of drugs. How can we make that linkage, and why is that not more well known amongst the general public?
Well, the linkage comes from my access to the clinical trial data that was used to bring drugs like Prozac, Zoloft, Paxil, and the other drugs in the SSRI group of drugs to the market. Most doctors generally haven't got to see all of the clinical trial data behind these drugs. One of the unique things that we've got at the moment is that if I was to make a claim about a drug, saying that I've got a drug that will be useful treatment for the flu or asthma or whatever, and didn't let people see the data behind my claim, like for instance, if you were asking me on this program now, okay, that's fine that you make this claim, but show me the data. If I refuse to show you the data, it will be the end of my career. If I refuse to show my academic colleagues the data, it will be the end of my career. But the pharmaceutical industry get to hold the data back, and they only drip feed out to people the data that they want you to see. Now, I've been an expert witness in some legal cases that have involved this group of drugs in the case of people who have become homicidal or become suicidal. And because of that, I've had access to clinical trial data that a lot of other people haven't seen. And once you get to see that data and add it up, that's the data that underpins the estimate that there could be up to 1,000 or 2,000 people going on to become suicidal or are possibly homicidal in the United States, and the same number in Europe. The reason a lot of other people don't say the same kind of things is they still haven't had access to the data. They see me saying these things, but they feel, I guess, that it isn't enough to see a person like David Healy say these things for us to believe it. We have to see the data with our own eyes before we'll be prepared to believe it. Except, of course, if the kinds of things that I say that I've just said to you now, for instance, or that you've just read out from the blog posting, if I've got it wrong, I'm going to be sued by the pharmaceutical companies. I mean, so I think people can take from the fact that I haven't been sued and I feel able to say these kind of things, that actually there is data there. They can't see it, but there is data there to support these claims.
Further complicating the issue is the fact that the general public is often, as in the case of the Fort Hood shooter, left in a state of limbo regarding the medical history of the perpetrators of these mass shooting events. Often stories are reported with vague and unconfirmed details about antidepressants, or sometimes just medication. It can be difficult for the average person to sort through the daily reports of adverse and violent effects of these types of drugs. One website that helps in that effort is SSRIstories.org. Begun in the 1990s, it is a repository of over 5,000 news articles in which prescription drugs are linked to adverse events, including incidents of violence. Last week, Julie Wood, one of the proprietors of the site, joined me to discuss the problem of sorting through the often incomplete information from these reports. Well, when we talk about complications when it comes to exploring these issues, I think another complication is, of course, that medical histories are generally kept private even after the death of the people involved in these stories, so we only ever come at it from the outside perspective, usually based on what we find in media reports. I'm not sure if SSRI Stories does any independent or other types of vetting, or if there's other ways to get information about any of these, the people involved in these stories. But I've found, for example, in the past, I found lists of mass shooters who were on some type of antidepressant. And when I tried to verify some of the people and what was their medical history, what drugs were they taking, how do we know this? There are people on those lists that I've seen that I can't in any way verify were on any type of psychotic medication. So I don't know where some of these lists come from. I don't know how we access this information. Have you encountered that type of problem when it comes to documenting some of these cases?
Definitely. And it's very interesting because what we're talking about is mostly the U.S. And one of the things I've learned is that every state has different legislation with respect to privacy in terms of crime scene photos and toxicology reports and autopsy reports. And it ranges from everything from it's public information to that it is totally sealed. And then in between, there's some states that allow some access to people with, quote, legitimate interests, like a researcher. We have I've made some links, and my husband's made some links with researchers in other countries where coroner's reports and toxicology reports are available. And I have read a lot of those, and I've talked to the people and seen the data from some of those. And that is really fascinating because one of the things I learned there, and to divert a little bit, is you go to all the SSRI deaths. So you look at the deaths where SSRIs have been involved. And case after case after case, you see the coroner saying, well, you know, he hanged himself, but we can't be sure that it was deliberate. You go, what? And you read so many of these things that you start to think, well, no wonder the suicide rate hasn't changed. Nobody's counting suicides as suicides. So that's one thing I picked up from that. But your original point about the jurisdictional issues on privacy, making it very difficult to uncover some of the truth, is very true.
In the final equation, the question of the causal linkage between SSRIs and indeed other forms of psychiatric drugs and incidents of violence needs to be taken seriously. There are many factors at play here, from differences in individual reactions to the fact that people who are more likely to commit violent acts in the first place are often the people who are prescribed these drugs. But the threat of violence has been taken seriously enough that the FDA in the US, the Ministry of Health in Japan, and other similar bodies in countries around the world have added a warning in their guidelines for antidepressants. According to the Japanese Ministry of Health, there are cases where we cannot rule out a causal relationship of hostility, anxiety, and sudden acts of violence with the medication. And in the FDA formulation, antidepressant medicines may increase suicidal thoughts or action in some children, teenagers, and young adults within the first few months of treatment. How can it be seen to be a good thing for anyone but the drug manufacturers themselves that these drugs have been on the market for decades, and the bodies in charge of regulating them still can only offer such wishy-washy, non-evidence-based statements? The issue of drug-linked violence is one that we as a society need to start discussing and acting on soon. Otherwise, we will continue to let the status quo be ruled not by doctors or patients or their loved ones, and certainly not by the victims of these mass murders, but by the men in the boardrooms of these pharmaceutical companies who have been shown time and time again to care about nothing other than their own bottom line.
Hold on. So you're telling me that Bayer knew that this drug was infected with the AIDS virus, they yanked it from the market in America, and then they dumped it in markets overseas?
They had to figure out a way, Joe, to make a profit on a product that they could not sell in America. So they made a huge profit. They dropped the product in Japan, Spain, and France. By the way, Joe, government officials in France that allowed that to happen actually had to go to prison for it. In America, not one corporate executive for this company has been indicted or even criminally investigated by our Justice Department.
Why not?
This video is brought to you by the subscribers of BoilingFrogsPost.com.
Howdy. Now, isn't that something about the drugs? You know, one pill makes you larger and one pill makes you small, but the ones that mother give you don't do anything at all. Go ask Alice when she's 9 feet tall. Yeah, the White Rabbit. Well, we're at the end of the show again, and we could go on and on about the ramifications of the drug industrial complex and so on. But you know, there's so much other stuff going on right now. Recently, a person who created videos on the internet about 9/11 that, you know, I'm pretty sure they were okay. I played some of them on this show advocating their content as being, you know, accurate. But recently this fellow put out a video why 9/11 is, why thermite is irrelevant, whatever it was. And he would not admit that, he kept writing that small aluminum, that's all nano aluminum is, nano thermite is. It's just small thermite, right? It doesn't occur naturally. And we had a back and forth deal that you can go and see on my YouTube channel. But I figured I might show some of that next week if we don't have a crisis in the meantime. So we're going to go to episode 16 next week. And anyway, in the meantime, watch the reruns. It was a great show today.